Can a barren desert give birth to an oasis? What if death walked beside you, not to take, but to push you forward? And what if the scorching sands of despair were merely the soil where life plants its deepest miracles? In today's Note Left Behind by Old Billy, we enter a poetic and philosophical journey of survival, surrender, and creation. It's a raw and mystical reflection on desire, inner transformation, and the dance between life and death, told with the power of imagery that blurs the line between dream and reality. If you've ever faced moments when giving up seemed easier than pressing on, this story will touch something deep in you. Because sometimes what we call an end is actually the beginning of our oasis. Stay with us. Let the journey unfold.
When the fog descended, silence settled over the village after the discovery of Old Billy's departure. His notes were left stacked, serving as entertainment for the locals who chose to share them with others.
Number 023 Oasis. Of all my passages, the one that strikes my chest the hardest today was witnessing the birth or expansion of an oasis in the middle of nowhere under a sun that seemed to want to consume our planet from the equatorial line. As I burned my feet on the scorching sand and walked without a direction, breathing that dry and hot air, I desperately wished to be somewhere else, to wake up from that nightmare, or to experience the dream of a real oasis. Dying also crossed my mind, but we always want to watch the end of bad movies because hope is truly something strong and real. So, I agreed that I would die in peace at any moment, but I wouldn't leave the cinema before the end. Making peace with Mrs. Death is truly an interesting thing, for she, so rejected, has become needy and capable of great generosity to prove that she only fulfills a natural role in life. Returning to the desiring moment. If death wasn't going to take me, unless I allowed myself to feel fear at a higher level than hope and froze the rhythm of my heart, then I would have to choose between waking up or finding the oasis. Wake up? That word might suggest a dream, but I wasn't sleeping. Better choose another? Awaken? I don't know, I don't like that word either. You see the difficulty? So if I can't even define this path, better not walk it. Then oasis became the inexorable, and I love this word. Full of certainty, it is free from doubt. The inexorable transforms the insecurity of before into the certainty of now. I walked a few more days, surpassing the limits of physical resistance, but confident that my desire would lead me to the most beautiful of all oases, past and future. Mrs. Death, always by my side, kept her word, and in her terrifying way pushed my back, repeating, "The poor only advance when they stumble," and then she would laugh, full of contradictory tenderness. She was happy in that rebellious role of comforting rather than scaring. When I was finally beginning to harmonize with the harshness of the arid condition, I found a small date palm tree that seemed to be emerging from its early childhood. Death filled with life and gave me a long embrace. There we danced the song of the lovers' separation, and she left with a face transformed with satisfaction for failing in her mission. From that point onward, as the clock ticked, I stayed there quietly for many days trying to listen to nature. I watched as new leaves arrived, a new ring appeared on the tree trunk, and a vapor rising to my right signaled the presence of water heading toward an invisible cloud that would one day become opaque and float, obeying the commands of the wind. I remember myself so thin and delicate. I wondered if I had been drawn to that place or if I was creating it in partnership with death and life. Before the answer, the ground opened, and what was once a slight moisture turned into a spring pouring pure liquid under my eyes, which shut tight and when reopened found a garden already formed and other adult date palms. Behind me, voices from a caravan arrived with food and construction materials. White tents cast shadows for the elders, who scolded the mischievous children eager to bathe in the generous lagoon that allowed animals to drink. Gratitude made me tremble, and I no longer cared about knowing how much responsibility I would have in all that. When the leather of my new watch strap revealed itself to be old, the oasis was fully formed, and the desert called me back to its dry sands. I shouted for the presence of Mrs. Death to protect me from her dangers and embraced life. Again, the three of us were walking under the sun, but with a huge difference. I knew that, by desiring, creating or finding it, the oasis would make itself present. Present? Inside me, the oasis lasted for as many days as the new crossing. In the incomparable taste of dates, in the stories of passers-by, in the polished jewels of women hidden under linen and silk veils, in pots of wine and leather canteens containing the transparent gold of water that sprang from my feet. Everything in me was oasis, and I would never be that urban being I once was. Improbable flowers and agile birds cooperated with the bees in the mission of pollinating and ensuring the miracle of nature expanding life around what had once been a doubtful and audacious vapor rising from the earth. Oasis. Oasis, now that Mrs. Death visits me again, it is him I miss. Life invites and announces what we already know. Created or found, the oasis now can no longer be separate. We are one with it, and that has to be enough. No effort went beyond the desire, no other effort is necessary. But wait. Everything transforms into evolution, regardless of appearances and circumstances, always when there is the conscious fertilization of the participating agents. Once an oasis is installed within the being, an oasis will remain there, bringing joy to death and life, contradicting certainties and discarding doubts. Only that abundance fulfilling all needs. Nothing more to be done, oasis to be.
This text is a beautifully poetic and philosophical reflection on transformation, resilience, and the interplay between life, death, and creation. Here are some key aspects of its depth and impact. 1. Symbolism and themes. The oasis as a metaphor for inner transformation. The journey through the desert symbolizes an internal struggle, and the oasis represents a moment of realization, enlightenment, or inner peace. Death as a companion rather than an enemy. The personification of Mrs. Death as a paradoxical guide adds depth to the narrative, illustrating how mortality can push individuals toward purpose rather than merely destruction. The power of desire and creation. The text explores how desire, rather than passive hope, acts as a driving force for transformation. The protagonist does not simply wait for an oasis, but engages in a process of bringing it into existence. Integration of life and death. The story suggests that once one has encountered or created their personal oasis, they become inseparable from it, blending life and death into a unified experience. Poetic and mystical. The narrative flows like a dream, blending reality with surreal elements, making it feel both deeply personal and universally relatable. Reflective and philosophical. The protagonist constantly questions their experience, embracing contradictions and arriving at a profound acceptance of life's cyclical nature. A sense of timelessness. The text blurs the boundaries of time, showing personal transformation as something beyond linear progress. Rather, it's an unfolding process. Rich, evocative imagery creates a visceral experience for the reader. Strong personification, death, life, gives abstract concepts emotional weight. The use of paradoxes, e.g., death bringing life, losing oneself to find meaning, deepens the philosophical engagement. The ending ties back to the idea that true change is permanent and self-sustaining. Overall impression. This text is a profound meditation on existential themes, masterfully weaving poetic language with philosophical insights. It invites the reader to reflect on their own journey, the meaning of struggle, and the inevitability of transformation. It is both a story and a piece of wisdom literature, something that could be read multiple times, each revealing new layers of meaning.
After all, John, what is the purpose of these notes? And also these stories that are beginning to appear. What is the point of all this here?
Mr. Onyx Senatore, our dear maestro, I am delighted that this question comes from a musician. But before I answer what I understand about what we are doing, let me clarify something very important. This material was never intended to be exposed. In fact, these are intimate notes, created as an outlet for someone who lacked an appropriate environment to open up and express themselves authentically. In these notes, we will find many entries in which old Billy treated the Notes app as his only friend, the one that knew how to listen to him without judgment. In other words, there was never any intention to interfere with anyone else's existence. Now, trying to answer your question, old Billy often spoke about the date palm tree contained within the seed of the fruit. The shell is dense and the essence within it is subtle. Therefore, the life within must find a way to soften the shell, refine the density, and open a path for its expansion. Old Billy documented his personal efforts to fulfill his natural potential, and in this process, identified art as his greatest ally in softening resistances. Thus, I conclude that the purpose of our readings is to share elements that ease density, allowing the inner subtlety of those who seek to perceive more of the great life within the small life to expand. In other words, to integrate one's individual essence with the essences that surround it. Perhaps music is the most effective facilitator of all, as it conveys meaning without relying on verbal codes, which often meet semantic resistance in the rational mind. And when words are used, as in this story, they are protected by poetic license. Thank you, Dr. Ada. Brilliant analysis, as usual.